While compared to most of America, New York City is a very old city. But there's things that are much older that have long since been forgotten here, even in the historic area of downtown Manhattan. Today we're going to explore forgotten New York from Alexander Hamilton, who became a powerful force in American politics and lived most of his life here in New York City, all the way to Little Syria, and then up a interesting lane that's filled with so much history that I think deserves more attention. And it's named Maiden Lane. I'm Ariel, this is Urbanist. Let me know where you're watching from. Right now, we are going to see Hamilton for free. No, I'm not talking about the hit Broadway musical. I'm talking about his graveyard. Right here is Hamilton's grave. July 14th, 1804, his funeral procession ended right here. This is where he was buried, underneath this pyramid here in New York City's Trinity Church graveyard. This is one of the most important churches in American history. Also one of the most wealthiest parishes in the world, valued up to $9 billion, maybe even more. And Alexander Hamilton is laying rest here right next to his dear wife Eliza and his son Philip Hamilton, which we can see the plaque right over here. Now, I've been here many times and it's raining, so pardon the camera being all blurry, but been here many times showing Alexander Hamilton, but there's a place just right behind this graveyard which I think has been nearly forgotten, and it's such a shame. So let's wiggle around downtown Manhattan and go to Little Syria, which if you're a New Yorker, you probably haven't even heard of. Hello, photos from New York. Hello, Ham. Nice to see you here. Let me zoom in the marker right over here. It says the patriot of the incorruptible integrity, the soldier of approved valor, the statesman of consummate wisdom, whose talents and virtues will be admired. Right here, Alexander Hamilton. Kate says it was raining another time you were here. Yeah, it's always raining in Alexander Hamilton's graveyard. Hello, Philip. Nice to see you here. Welcome. Hello, Wendy. Welcome. So right here is the third iteration of Trinity Church, built in the Gothic style. Beautiful building made by the iconic James Renwick, who did many of the famous churches here in New York City, like Grace Church, even further uptown. And right behind it, we have the new Trinity Commons, which is designed by shop architects, and they did in this beautiful copper style in order to emulate the color of the church itself, but also to pay tribute to the Art Deco movement and also the Statue of Liberty. So it's a beautiful building that you really don't see of anymore. And I hope this style is, because it becomes even bigger. Neo Art Deco. Hello, Sally. Nice to see you here. Hello, Susie. I have a photo of that graveyard taken from a building above. Oh, cool, Susie. Like this one right here. That's how Trinity Church will have looked like back in the 1800s. As we can see right behind Trinity Church, there was not that much development, and it was mostly just water. Literally where we're standing right now would have been the water. Right down there where the street is currently. Debbie sent 50 stars. Thank you so much. Susie says not that far above. Indeed. maybe from this angle, right here. This is how it looked like when Trinity Church started getting very wealthy. So the reason Trinity Church moved here in the first place, a lot of people forget that a lot of downtown Manhattan is built in landfill, like right over here. This church ended up getting this spot because it was very cheap land. No one was going to move right by the water on this side where it was a bit more swampier. So they end up buying up this lot and end up owning the rights to anything west of it, which at first sounded like a terrible deal. Like, yeah, sure, they own a few more swamps and marshes. Okay. What is that worth? Well, that changed once New York City's water area had to be landfilled in order to extend the waterfront to build more docks, piers, slips, and to increase commerce and manufacturing here in New York City. And that's where Trinity Church saw its opportunity. A, they started selling the land right over here that was recently landfilled. And B, with the rise of skyscraper, they started leasing the lands around it for a whole lot of money. All the way until World Trade Center, they end up getting billions of dollars in revenue. Kay says 4 minutes to start party. Ooh, awesome. Excuse me. So beautiful right here. Wow. It's worth coming to these places for rain. So this is accessible all day, every day. Well, not all day, but every single day until about 4 p.m. There's no security checkpoint. I think you need to go to security right now in order to get inside the actual church. But for the graveyard, it's easy to access. And they've roped off this area, so we gotta take the scenic route to go back outside. DS says, how old are these graves? No one has been buried here for nearly 100 years. So a lot of these graves are dating back to the 1700s, all the way to the early 1800s, such as Alexander Hamilton, 1804. I think some of the oldest here are mid 1700s. So here we have a tribute to the man who survived the rain, Noah himself. We have some very ancient biblical references here. David, Jacob, Noah, right here. Who are these two? Let us know in the comments. And no, this is not an episode of Gossip Girl. This is Adam and Eve. And let me test your biblical knowledge. Who's this guy? This guy looks rather kind of a man of two worlds. A man who has had to make very tough decisions in his own life. A man who straddles the line between lightness and darkness. Who is he? DS says, is that Mo? No, it would not be the Prophet Muhammad. In the US, as in most countries around the world, you won't see depictions of him. So no, that's not him. Is it Moses? No, it's not Moses. No, that's a good guess, though. Moses indeed had a big beard. Wendy says it's your uncle. The monstrum, says J.A. I don't know what the monstrum is. But this is Abraham. Abraham or Seth? It says Ruth, Abraham, Seth. It's Abraham. Had to kill his own son. kind of a very disturbing story. And this is Enoch. So this is the Astor cross. It was designed by Thomas Nash, and the ornate cross illustrates the genealogy of Christ according to St. Luke. It was dedicated in 1914 in memory of Caroline Webster Schermerhorn Astor. Wow, okay, they married really into that old Dutch families of New York. And she was buried here in Trinity. No, she was buried in Trinity Church Cemetery, but all the way in Uptown, which is their other cemetery. Lori says, didn't kill his son, was summoned to, but God gave a ram instead. Oh, I'm glad. Yes. So he was told to kill his son, but he didn't. Thank you, everyone, for clarifying. So yeah, Abraham did not do the deed. He was stopped. A lamb was sacrificed instead. Okay, stop raining. Nice. Rebel says, quote, Rebel says that God said, quote, okay, it's the thought that counts. Hey, Lori, nice to see you here. Lori says we also hit up graveyards. Oh, that's awesome. All right. Hello, Joseph. Hello, Ron. Christy, Susie, and Marianne all sent 500 stars. Wow, thank you so much for the 500 stars during the stars party. Stars party end up multiplying the amount of stars you send, so thank you so much. Donald says, I love visiting old graveyards too. Yes. So the area we're going to next is right around the corner of Trinity Church. Now, a lot of people, when they are a tourist in New York City, they go up to Wall Street, right over here. Just right down there, 1 block away, is Federal Hall and the New York Stock Exchange. Or they go over to World Trade Center down this way, or towards the Wall Street Bull and to see the Statue of Liberty that way. But one area of Manhattan, even as a local, and I know many tourists, they'll actually venture to these few streets down here because there's not much to see. But that's precisely where we're going. Lamb, you're from the UK, welcome. Veronica says, is the party still going on? Maybe, the Stars party might still be going on. Dia says, I Hulk smashed that like button. Thank you so much for Hulk smashing that like button. My first job was at 1 Wall Street, says Marianne. Ooh, yeah, that's cool. So we can see that some old buildings still survive here in Lower Manhattan, even though it has been completely redeveloped for the most part. From the birth of the skyscrapers of the 1920s and 30s to the building of World Trade Center and Battery Park. Lamb says, have you ever been to England? Lamb, you can go deep into the urbanist archives. Many years and years ago, I ventured off into the great lands of Sheffield, Brighton, and many other places in England. By many years, I just mean like a few months ago. Check those out. Agent Rico says, hey Ariel, just join. What's new? Well, we're not today finding out what's new. We're finding out today what's old. We're passing Greenwich Street. It's both sunny and rainy at the same time, so we're going to see some rainbows. Morgan, nice to see you here. Hello, Ham. Welcome. So here we have a Holiday Inn. Really prime location for a hotel. Oh, this looks like a nice new pizzeria. Look at that. Sienna. Very beautifully decorated. Oh, and we have a cafe. Oh, nice. Good to see a modern cafe opening up here. Dia says, any great coffee? Well, my immediate suggestion would be Blue Bottle, which is only 2 blocks away. They got rid of the last phone booth, says Lampshake. They did indeed, which is very sad that they did. And yeah, very sad. Here we have Washington Street. Photos from New York says Blue Bottle is always great. Indeed it is, yeah. Ham is watching from Korea. Anya Haseo, Ham. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry, I got to close my umbrella over here. Right here we see One World Trade Center. And let me put my umbrella into my backpack. So if we were to come here 140 years ago, 1880s, we wouldn't be hearing pop music. We wouldn't be hearing the likes of Harry Styles blasting on the corners of these bars. But instead we would be hearing the beautiful, soothing music of traditional Syrian music. Oh, check it out on Spotify. It's amazing to listen to that Syrian music. I love the guitar and the way they sing so rhythmically. You would be smelling the fumes of hookah. People smoking water pipe that are flavored with green apples, might be flavored with cloves, other interesting spices or fruits. You would be hearing men speaking Arabic and other men doing business here in Arabic and selling their round breads and many other things, drinking Turkish coffee. Because this right here, where I'm standing, was Little Syria. People called it the Syrian colony, where many thousands of Syrians moved right here. They came off the boat in Ellis Island, or right before then, it was right at Castle Clinton, and walked a mere short few blocks away to settle down for a new life in America. But why haven't most people heard of this? I grew up in New York City. I have not even heard of Little Syria. As I walk through here, I don't see anything that's Syrian. Well, first we have to clarify one thing. We're not talking about Syria as we know it today, the country of Syria. We're talking about what was known as Greater Syria back in the late 1800s. This included countries like Lebanon, specifically Lebanon, Syria itself, and parts of Jordan and many other countries around there. Let me show you some photos. Rebel says, this is the first time I'm hearing it. Yep, many people have not heard of it. This would be a crowd of men that you would see on a street corner, chatting after being overly caffeinated with, well, I call it Turkish coffee, but they would be drinking their version of Turkish coffee, Syrian coffee. Here we'd see a family just be right here outside one of the tenement buildings, like this one. And this is what we know as, this is what was known as Syria back in the late 1800s. So it would be Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, parts of Jordan, and parts of Kuwait as well. And Turkish people might have been thrown in there as well. You would smell beautiful baklava and those amazing pastries from the Middle East being baked right over here. But then we had this. 1950. The Brooklyn Battery Tunnel was built. But that wasn't the only thing that was going to be built. Robert Moses, the master planner and destroyer of New York, wanted to build a huge bridge that will cross through Manhattan, connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn and New Jersey. This was a crazy plan because this bridge was going to destroy a portion of the iconic, historic New York City skyline. Yep, Robert Moses and the people who followed him and the people who gave him money, the federal government, was considering destroying half of the historic New York City skyline in order to build a bridge to make it easier for people to use their cars to drive between Brooklyn and New Jersey. As you can tell, I think Robert Moses at that point took it a little bit too far. People were saying, oh, okay, Robert Moses, sure, we can build bridges all around that all look the same. Throggs Neck Bridge, the Whitestone Bridge. We could build all the tunnels, the RFK Bridge, the Triborough. Sure, okay. We can destroy the Bronx. We can displace the entire Norwegian community that was based in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Sure, we could do that. But now you're pushing it too far. You want to destroy landmarks of New York City. So they completely rejected that idea. However, they did approve the building of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And that was one of the final nails in the coffin for Little Syria. Little Syria was torn asunder. No longer did we have the thriving community of Arab speakers here that birthed some of the famous writers in all of history. We'll talk about him soon. Let me know who it is. It's one of the most famous writers in all of history. Wrote here, right here. One of these tenements, right here. Right now, there's only 3 surviving buildings of Little Syria. One is this one, the tenement building. Dutch says the Brooklyn Battery birthday just passed on May 25th. That's awesome. So right here is, and Dutch, welcome. Thank you so much for dropping a little bit extra context. Right here is one of the tenement buildings that survived. The only official tenement building that survived. This one was not officially tenements. And the other one is the church, St. George's Church. Only 3 buildings. This is one of the many families who were displaced. They had to move somewhere else. And if you are Arab American, you probably are familiar with what became of Little Syria. It moved over to Brooklyn. It went over to Atlantic Avenue, mostly, in that area. Until very recently, where, again, that community has dissolved and been moving to all parts around New York City. Betty, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. I appreciate you, Betty. Thank you. Thank you so much. The Brooklyn Battery Tunnel had to make way for all the vents, also in order to actually build the tunnel right underneath Manhattan. So a lot of these buildings had to be destroyed in order to make way for the massive construction project. That would change New York City in many, many ways. The real final nail in the coffin was when they built World Trade Center, the original complex, before the terrible events of September 11th, 2001. Cool On says, I would guess Walt Whitman. DS says, who was the writer? CB got it right. A lot of people guess non-Arab writers. Oscar Wilde nor Walt Whitman were Arab. The Arabic writer that became one of the best-selling writers in the entire world, selling one of the top 5 books sold in history, along with the Bible, along with that book that Mao Zedong wrote, that unfortunately printed so many copies, kind of cheated his way there, to Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. The one that joined the ranks was Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. One of my favorite books, right here. Khalil Gibran was a Lebanese-American poet who lived right here in Little Syria, wrote his very books here in this thriving neighborhood. Let's find more photos of him. Actually, let me show you another photo. This would be the street corner vendors selling the bread pastries that a lot of Middle Eastern people eat. Here we have a shoemaker, a cobbler, Syrian cobbler. And as I mentioned, the men smoking nargile or hookah right over here. They probably would have called it nargile since they were from Lebanon, and they use certain French words. And the man himself, Khalil Gibran. He was also a painter. Look at that. And he painted his own book covers as well. But one of my favorite poems of his, actually, I have so many cool photos. This is another one. This would be a kid that would serve tea throughout the neighborhood. So that huge canister was that typical Lebanese Syrian tea. I think it would be the red one that's similar to what the Turkish people drink. But one of my favorite poems of his is this one, On Marriage, which reads, and he wrote this right here he wrote most of this right here in New York City, so keep this in mind. Let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but not eat from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, For only the hand of life can contain your hearts and stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. He wrote a style that was called prose poetry. So as you can see, it was written like prose, but it reads like poetry. And I love that poem because I think it's the perfect love poem. It's the most grounded love poem. While many love poems, may they be written by Lord Byron or Shakespeare's sonnets, a little bit more about the flutteriness of love, he talks about the very reality of love, which is don't try to conjoin into one being, as many poets like to say, but stand on each other's own 2 feet, separately, but because of the 2 columns of any building, always make for a very strong building that stands together. It's very beautiful. Love it. Read the other poems by him on the Prophet. Great book. There's also a movie that visualizes his poems in animated form. It's actually really good too. So right over here is the main church where many of the Syrian immigrants would live. This is St. George's Chapel. St. George's Chapel was built in 1812. It's a very old building. It was a lot shorter back then. And it was at first a home for many new immigrants coming in. But then it became a church in 1925 for the Syrian community. A lot of the Syrians that came here weren't even Muslim. So unfortunately here we have nowadays the misconception, if you grew up in America, not really too familiar with the Arab world, a lot of people just assume everyone's Muslim in the Arab world. No, there's a whole lot of Christians in the Arab world. Many of the Syrians that actually moved here, the majority of them were Christian, most of them Maronites, and they worshiped right over here. But in 1982, this was converted to an Irish pub. I laugh because, you know, the irony of it all in New York City, how a church can become a pub. And wow, AR left a very generous $30 super chat. A round of hearts to AR. He's a frequent super chatter, also a mega urbanist. He says, thank you for this tour today and also for the member postcard. My pleasure, AR. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the $30 super chat. I'm going to peek into the bar. I'm not sure if they're going to be okay with the camera, but let's peek in. Just going to peek in. It's also Japanese. That. And the only real marker that we know that this is the Syrian church is right here. It's covered by the pipes, which is such a shame. All right, now let's walk over to our next area. Jay says, well, I'll go drink. Dutch Mall says, an empty bar, my kind of bar. Yeah, classic Irish pub. Nice and empty, relaxed. That's crazy. Great storytelling, says DS. Oh, thank you so much, DS. I appreciate that. And the tenement, part of the tenement has been converted into a fancy restaurant. Look at that. But then something really fascinating happened during September 11th. As many of you know, it's a very sad tragedy. I know I have people now watching from my show that were born after this event. September 11th, 2001, 2 planes crashed into each of the Twin Towers, completely destroying the majority of the World Trade Center area, save for a building or two. This was devastating also for the Arab community. That many were already, some of them were even based here. Some of them lived here for more than 120 years, 140 years, had family here. They were fully American by all means. But they were persecuted as well. In places like in Brooklyn, a lot of them lost businesses. But there was another church right in this area, St. Joseph's Marionette Church. Now, if you see my Brooklyn tours, you probably already know that St. Joseph's is already in Brooklyn Heights, because that church moved over there. That church moved many, many years before those attacks ever happened. And they thought that the church was lost. However, as they were digging through the rubble of the World Trade Center, they end up finding out in Ground Zero the cornerstone of St. Joseph's Marionette Church, which they thought was completely lost to history. That cornerstone was brought over and is currently still at the St. Joseph's in Brooklyn Heights, which you can still see to this day. I have a video of it. Check it out. Search Brooklyn Churches Urbanist and you'll see it. Really, really interesting that they found that in the rubble. Thais says September 11th, it's the kind of event that you remember exactly where you were when it happened. Yes, indeed. The first American mosque was also here. And it's one of the reasons why they actually wanted to build a mosque in this area, but quite didn't happen. So there has been calls in order to preserve those three buildings in what used to be Little Syria. Nothing has happened quite yet. I think they're starting to be protected. And I hope at least one or two of those buildings are protected. Now this area we're walking through right now, a lot of it was landfilled. However, throughout most of the early 1800s, this water actually flowed inland through an area called Maiden Lane, which is still a street to this day. And we're going to go right to it. So we see that stretch, that was a brook that went into the island of Manhattan and provided some fresh water, or not, yeah, fresh water because it's the Hudson, fresh water for the residents who lived here at that time. Jenna says, I love that plaque. Oh yeah. Cynthia says, hey, I love historic walks downtown. Oh, I'm glad you do. Thank you so much for tuning in, Cynthia. Hope you're doing well on Staten Island. I love this for your last scheduled live stream in NYC, says Susie. Oh yeah. I'm glad you're enjoying this show. So everyone, this is the last live stream I'm going to do in New York City for a long while, because I will be in Europe for 3 whole months. exploring many different cities, from the iconic to the underrated and then the expected to the far corners of places that most people really wouldn't go just casually as a tourist. We're going to go to a lot of places in Europe. Stay tuned every single day. Thursdays through Saturdays, 3 times a week, at 9 a.m. New York City time. I know it's early, but that would be a great time. New York City time. That would be a great time for Europe time. 2 p.m. UK, 3 p.m. Europe. Starting next week, next Thursday. All right, let's make our way to Maiden Lane. So we're following the route where the brook would have been, right this way. AR says you should update your banner. I think I will, since it'll be a very long schedule. Thank you so much, AR, for reminding me. So AR is referring to the visual banner I have on my YouTube channel. And it says Saturdays and Saturdays and Wednesdays at 1 p.m. So that will be changed. Thank you. And there'll be, on occasion, night live videos. So some people will be able to tune in at a reasonable hour if you live in the west coast of the U.S. Here's a very interesting statue before we go to Maiden Lane. This right here is called the double take statue. The reason it's called the double take statue, we'll see the plaque right over here, double check statue, my mistake, double check statue by Seward Johnson. It says the everyman businessman presence in Liberty Park, who before had faded to the background amongst his human brethren, has been called the survivor. He was lifted, battered yet whole, from the dust and rubble of September 11th, 2001. The parks has since rebuilt, and this bronze man sits near his original site, where he scratches and bruises he sustained that long day as a reminder of hope and endurance for us all. It was originally built in 1982 by Seward Johnson. DS says, are you revisiting places or are they all different? Who knows, DS? So the reason this is now called the double check statue, because at first it was just the everyman businessman, was because while the rubble of the ground zero just filled up the air in a cloud of debris smoke, as the firemen started coming through trying to search for survivors as quickly as possible, through that hazy smoke, they saw a man sitting down looking at his briefcase. And they yelled out to him, thinking that he was actually a real person. So they double checked to see if he was really, got close, and they found out that it was actually just a statue, because it looked so lifelike, especially covered in the dust of the rubble, which you can actually see in the photo that's published online. So check it out, double check statue, September 11th. You'll see how it looked like, covered in rubble. Looks like a real man. Marianne sent 200 stars. Thank you so much. So let's go to Maiden Lane for even deeper into history. I already talked about the 1880s with the Syrian colony that lasted all the way to about the 1950s. Now we're going to go way back. Well, actually, not way back. We're going to go to the same era of the Syrian colony, but a different part of New York City, 1890s. And there was a street that was called the Jewelry District before it moved further uptown. It was right here on Maiden Lane. AR says, is the red cube right behind me where the man lives? No, where the man lived, hoax was at the Astor Place Cube in the East Village, NoHo area. Millions and millions of people have walked through this very intersection. Not notice that there's something hidden right below their feet. Back in the 1890s, a jeweler and entrepreneur, William Barthman, wanted to impress the masses here in Lower Manhattan to sell his beautiful clocks, watches, and jewelry. Maiden Lane quickly became jewelry district where many of the famous jewelers were all based at. Some of them even continued on to this day, becoming some of the biggest companies in the world. So in order to attract attention, he built a clock right here, right underneath our feet. This is the William Bartham clock. It says 1884, that's when the store opened. This clock was built a little bit later. And originally it was a very different design. Now it's a more classic design. It's called the Arabic hand clock. So it's more traditional. But before it used to be very different. I'll show you an image. Now William Bartham was actually here up until just 2 years ago, until he moved a little bit further up here in Lower Manhattan and has one in Brooklyn. So this is how the storefront would have looked like back then. Yes, does the clock still work? It's supposed to work, yeah. And I think it's showing the right time right now. No, I don't think it's working. Nope, it's not working. It works sometimes. It's been like that for 100 years. Quite a change, yeah. Fortunately, the store had to move just a few years ago. The original clock was this. It was an interesting tablet clock where the numbers would change, similar to what you would see in the old airports of the 1950s. The problem with this clock was that it was designed by one of his co-workers who was the only guy who really knew how to repair it and maintain it. William Bartham did the overall design, and by the time both of them died by the early 1900s, the guy died in 1917, no one knew how to fix it. So the owner was confused. He was like, oh no, this is broken. I am a shop selling high-end clocks, and we have a clock that does not work in the front and no one knows how to fix it. So he was so embarrassed that he put a cardboard right on top of the clock. And Joe says, check your mic. Oh no. Let me know if you can hear me well. Your audio is a bit rough, okay. All right, let me know if you hear me now well. Loud and clear. All right, awesome. Thank you for letting me know. I recently upgraded to the DJI mic, which is really awesome. But the cable gets a little bit loose and it kind of sucks. I hope they end up updating that. So he ended up getting so embarrassed, the new owner of the shop, ended up getting so embarrassed by the clock that he ended up putting a cardboard above it every single night and every single day. He just did not want anyone to see it. Until finally, they ended up replacing the clock and putting the one that we see today. The cool thing is it had a light bulb right underneath it, so it would light up at night. And it was an attraction for many years for people passing through here in downtown Manhattan. Huh? I'm doing a live video right now. Yeah. YouTuber, yes. YouTuber.
What do you play?
Well, urbanist.
Urban.
Urbanist, yeah. Have a good day. So yeah, you would have to do it over and over and over again. And it became a very popular attraction. And thank you so much for the 777 Stargazer. I appreciate the $7.77. Awesome. 777, love it. Here we see a Bloomberg publication. The exact date of the clock is still kind of unclear. So it says 1899, some people say 1896, others say different dates. And here's the shop now, just a few blocks away. And this would have been the grand entrance to Maiden Lane. Let's walk a little bit further down. Justice says, Batman made a clock? No, Barthman. Sounds very similar. So in 1946, New York police estimated that 51,000 people stepped over the clock every day between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Kind of worked as a commercial. Sometimes two swift district telegraph messengers who have stopped to match pennies in the shadow of the corner of the building see the clock in the pavement with sudden twinges of consciousness or conscience. It electrifies their feet and sends them flying on their errand. DS says the chronovisor is hidden underneath the clock. Indeed. Indeed. The chronovisor, DS is making a reference to a device that is rumored to have existed in the Vatican archives that allows one to see into the past. Joe says, I love the shoes. Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate that. It didn't move. Yeah, the clock is broken. It works sometimes. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll see it working. So we can see some historic buildings still survive here to this day. One thing that does not survive anymore, and I wish it did, was the New York Arcade. The New York Arcade would have looked like this because it was built after the Burlington Arcade in London, which still survives to this day. But the New York Arcade, unfortunately, was a terrible financial disaster. It was a indoor walkway filled with jewelry shops that unfortunately weren't making any money. So they destroyed it just a few years later. But you can just imagine through one of these doorways would have been something like this. Imagine if we had that today. That was so cool. No. They weren't making any money. So they're like, oh no, it's completely useless. Let's just destroy all the work we did and move on. It goes to show that economics is a very interesting thing here in America, where it's more affordable to destroy something of beauty than it is to keep it and reinvent it for some other use. That has been the unfortunate case in almost all cities in America. Luckily in New York, we've saved many buildings. Other cities haven't been so lucky. Esfield says now there's a Subway. Yeah, now there's a Subway sandwiches. Not even a real Subway entrance. It could have been reused as a Subway entrance. That would have been so cool. All right. Let's see if we can find a plaque here, which I haven't found yet, but I think it's right over here. Right where we're standing, in this general vicinity, would have been a little house called 57 Maiden Lane. That was the address. In 1790, Thomas Jefferson from Virginia moved over here and set up shop because he just became the Secretary of State for George Washington, the very first president of the United States of America. And he moved right over here to Maiden Lane. And let's see if we can find the plaque. No, it's not right here. DS says, there it is. It's hidden all the way over there. All right. Let's see if we can sneak a peek. Right here is where the house would have been. "57 Maiden Lane. This plaque marks the site of the former residence of Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States of America, who on March 21st, 1790, the first Secretary of State under President Washington, came to New York City, then resided here on this spot, 57 Maiden Lane. This was erected in 1929 by the Home Insurance Company of New York. So right here is where Thomas Jefferson lived. And it says, oh my God, it says, warning, keep out, poison baited area. Oh, they seem to have a rat infestation. So now this rat infested park for this gigantic building, 59 Maiden Lane, used to be the place where Thomas Jefferson lived. However, one of William Barthman's, the guy with the clock on the corner, one of his main competitors moved in here. Oh, actually, before I even get to that story, something here happened. You can say this is where the room where it happens, from the Hamilton musical. Let me know if you remember that song, where Aaron Burr was lamenting that he wasn't at this special dinner party. Where did that dinner party take place? This is where the room where it happens. June 20th, 1790. Thomas Jefferson and his very good friend, James Madison, end up inviting Alexander Hamilton over for dinner. Now, these guys were enemies. And while they were usually be in the same rooms together, probably wouldn't hang out much, especially on a private dinner. But this was a very important private dinner because they were at odds with each other. This was an all-out feud between two factions of the government, of the new United States government. One faction of the government was on Hamilton's side, who wanted to centralize all the finances of America here in New York City. But more specifically, the federal government was going to run the central banking system and take up all the debt of the states as well, which would have given power to the American government to print money as they would like. So all the states would be at the beck and call of the federal government for money. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison really did not like this, but they wanted something else. Thomas Jefferson was working here. George Washington was here. He lived just very close by. Alexander Hamilton was here, Secretary of Treasury. Everyone was here. The entire government was based here. This was the nation's capital, the very first one. This was the central trade for the United States of America. Maybe Boston had some trade, of course a lot of trade, Philadelphia. But most of the southern US did not have many harbors. They did not have much manufacturing. They did not have that much financial wealth. So they thought, logically, let's make the capital of the United States of America here in New York City. But Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, being Southerners, were like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You want the Northerners to have all the power in money, and you want them to have all the power symbolically as the government of the United States of America, and in New York no less? They did not want that. So in order to come to terms, they invite Alexander Hamilton over, and Hamilton says, okay, if you let me absorb all the debt of the United States of America and centralize the banking system with the federal government, and let me print all the money I want to, I'll let you have Washington, D.C. as the nation's capital. But mind you, Washington, D.C. at that time was swamp. It was terrible land. No one would have thought that to be the nation's capital. But both parties came to a compromise, making it the Compromise of 1790. That's why here, in the room where it happens, we have Washington, D.C. as our nation's capital, and we have this gigantic building, the Federal Reserve, having all the power to print money as much as they would like. Okay, so let's go 100 years further. Remember the guy in the corner, back to the guy in the corner making clocks. The US rises in terms of its economy, rises in terms of its industrial prowess, and a lot of businesses started popping up. Those businesses started being the new way of keeping time portably, which is watches. Wristwatches that you would wear on your hand, revolutionary, or pocket ones at first. Pocket then watches on your wrists. This was a revolutionary new invention, and a lot of these jewelers in this area wanted to compete to make the first cool pocket watch, and a few years later the wristwatch. So Barthman had competition just a few blocks up when in 1875 a immigrant from the Czech Republic, at that time was called Bohemia, moved right here to the room where it happens, 57 Maiden Lane. A man by the name of Joseph Bulova moved in and started his very first jewelry company. A few years later, in the 1890s, he started making clocks and watches. And if you know what Bulova is, it's a very popular company. Still based in New York City. He started right here as well. And I'm wearing one of their watches right here. It was really cool. So the reason I mentioned this is actually I'm working with Bulova, not for this video though, so they're not sponsoring this one, but they are partnering up with me for TikTok videos and short Facebook videos. So stay tuned for a specific video about this. But it's really cool that I found out that where Joseph Bulova started was the same place where we have the central banking system. A really cool coincidence. Can we have a look? Yes, let me show Joseph Bulova right here. This is the man. He ended up being an immigrant all the way from very poor Czech Republic. He was a very talented jewelry maker and also a watchmaker later on. He ended up coming here to the United States of America in the 1870s with only 50 cents to his name, or a little bit earlier, late 1860s, to 50 cents to his name. He barely had any money. He also came during the economic crash. He had so much issue finding work that he was sleeping on benches here in downtown Manhattan. But luckily by the 1870s, he managed to have money to start up his own shop. Once he started his own shop, he ended up becoming a massive sensation, and Bulova ended up becoming one of the top American companies to make all types of clocks, from pocket watches to wristwatches to radio clocks to clocks that you have decoratively in your home. And here's one of the earlier ads. And here is another one. And this ended up becoming a massive industry where it was based. It was based just a few blocks away from where I grew up. So if you watch my video from last year where I give you a tour of my home neighborhood where I grew up for many years of my life, I grew up in the area of Jackson Heights, Queens, which is further north of Northern Boulevard. And just a few blocks away was the headquarters of Bulova. I've never really been into watches, but I've always very curious as to that company and what they did there. And that's where they actually at first manufactured a lot of the watches that people wore. So if you own like a Bulova watch, I think prior to the 1970s, 1980s, it probably was made here in New York City, or many parts of it were made here in New York City. In Queens, no less. A few blocks away from where I grew up. Really cool coincidence. So let me show you the watch. I'm so excited to work with them. So shout out to Bulova for being now new sponsors of Urbanist. Not specifically this video, but for other videos. So I ended up getting the Lunar Pilot 1, which is the same watch that astronaut David Scott wore on the Apollo 15 mission and landed on the moon. Yep. The original model, which was the only model, it was made specifically for him, so it was really the only one, ended up selling for more than $1 million. It's a whole lot of money. Luckily, Bulova ended up making a special edition one just about a year or so ago. And this is the Lunar Pilot 1. And this is a limited edition with the leather strap. I am so happy to have this. And in the back, it's a little bit hard to show with the leather strap, but there's a special commemorative plaque showing the man on the moon. So yeah, I don't accept too many sponsors. A little bit of insight about Urbanist. I don't accept too many sponsors, as I mentioned, because most sponsors really don't align either with my interests or with what I do on Urbanist. And also, I don't like sponsors that want too much say in my content. So this is a very special opportunity, and I accepted their partnership because A, it's actually kind of cool that ties into my childhood, just being a few blocks away from where I grew up. B, it being a classic New York City company, and being a true New Yorker, I really appreciate New York City companies, and there's still New York City companies doing cool stuff. And C, I actually found a watch that I really like, which usually I never find a watch I like. That's why I rarely ever wear watches. So this is a very special moment. So there we go, Bulova. Let's go to our very last stop, shall we? Now you can tell time without asking on the live stream. Indeed, I can. Indeed. So you can moonwalk with that watch? Yes, I can. I think I can. Let's see. Let me know. Ella says, noticing your curly hair is so cute. Thank you so much. Do you guys want to see the back of the watch? Let me know. I'm gonna film all of this for the short video, but might as well do it on live video as well. All right. Susie says I can't see you with the smartwatch. No, it's not my style too much. It's a little bit hard to see because the leather, I would have to remove the leather strap. But, I'll do my best to show it to you right here. There we go. Find better photos online, but right here, David Scott on the moon. So cool. And it has like a stopwatch. So cool. Someone asks, is this mechanical or quartz? This is quartz. But it does look mechanical, which is cool. But the cool thing is it's very lightweight. Yeah, there we go. Hey, Anthony says live stream takes care to get because it sometimes is converted GeoZone. Yes, I'll fix Nightbot. You're referring to Nightbot, so I'll fix it soon. So, in perspective, the entire live is to show off the watch. Ron, so no, this video is not sponsored. So technically, I'm mentioning them for free for this video. Shh, don't tell them. But AAP says a rat was carrying the pizza. Yeah, rats get away with pizza. No, the reason I decided to do this live video is A, because I was already researching Little Syria before this got started. But B, because I ended up finding out that Alexander Hamilton story, which I thought would be really cool to say on the live video. So that's why I ended up making this live video. And this cool thing about reading history, especially in a city like New York, you end up finding crazy coincidences that make stories much more juicier, I think. And let me just put this. I have a very small wrist for some reason. This might be a very large 5'3". I have a tiny little wrist, so I have to wear it maximum on these watches. All right, let's go to our last stop, which ironically is also a watch theme. There's a lot of watches here for some reason. Yeah, let's go to our last stop. Ludo says, when's your first time landing in Europe? Next week. I'm heading off on Tuesday night, landing somewhere, someplace on Wednesday. Who knows? It might be Staten Island. It might be Europe Street in Staten Island. Joe says, you forgot to tell us the time. Indeed. Susie says, shall we keep asking you for the time? If they sponsor the live video, then yes. But no, they're only sponsoring the short videos. So not at the moment. I would not need you to constantly ask me the time. Susie says, I wish I could show you the sun clock near Broadway, near Chambers. Ooh, interesting. The time is now 2:20 p.m. Brought to you by Bulova. Says David. Indeed, David, thank you. Kathleen says, I'm so enjoying this. Wendy says, what time it is? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Wait. Bulova's not sponsoring this live video. I will only be telling the time on the short videos. I'm so glad when people who work hard get recognition from brands. Yeah. I really love, I worked before with Sennheiser. They're the ones who sponsored the David Bowie video. And it's really cool working with brands that have history to them. And kind of have this allure that goes beyond their products. I really like that. So it's cool to add another cool company to the roster. I'm gonna go this way. Gary says, you'll never get through the metal detectors at the airport. There's more metal in that watch than my car. S-Feel says that they're a high-end brand. They don't work with anyone. I think I will be one of the very first TikTokers that they're working with. They have partnered up with maybe a few YouTubers that are specifically about watches. They partner up with a lot of other cool places. They're working with the Apollo Theater. So when I come back to New York, we might just get an inside look into the Apollo Theater, which is going to be really awesome. But they haven't worked with the TikToker yet, / Facebooker. Dolores says, where would Ariel be visiting in Europe? Only time will tell. Indeed it will. Right here, final stop at Water Street and John Street. We had to take the long way around because that beautiful arcade that was built between John Street and Maiden Lane was destroyed. But nonetheless, we're here visiting our final stop, which is Starbucks. No, not Starbucks. It is the thing above Starbucks, right over here. It is a gigantic clock. What the hell is this gigantic clock doing here? Let's take a closer look. We're only a block away from the South Street Seaport. Ladies and gentlemen, we're no longer in Seattle, so we're no longer doing any Starbucks content. And I'm going to Europe. Starbucks won't be mentioned for many months. So take in this moment, breathe it in, enjoy it, because this will be the last Starbucks you'll see for many months. Before I have coffee elsewhere. And yes, one of the locations we'll be going in Europe is famous for coffee. Stay tuned. Right up here, we have a clock. This one's a little bit weird. And this one also is technically broken. But this one reads the time, has 72 squares. I don't even know how it works. But 1971, a graphic design professor from Cooper Union made this, Rudolph de Herrick. He made this because this was a public artwork for this building right over here. These guys used to be Emery, Roth and Sons, architectural firm back in the 1970s. Emery Roth, you might recognize that name. He designed many of the famous apartment buildings along Central Park. Also designed many awesome buildings in Brooklyn as well. Classic New Yorker, did amazing Art Deco style buildings. His sons ended up building this huge structure. Fortunately, they didn't make it in a cool style. I'm a little bit disappointed by that. But they did build this cool clock. Now, there used to be street furniture in front of this clock. It has also been destroyed. Oh my God, so many things being destroyed. This is such a shame. And it was supposed to be here, but also destroyed. Do I have a photo of it? No, no photo of it. Such a shame that they took away the street furniture. There used to be a phone booth, some funky chairs, which I would have loved to sit in. But no, it's not here. I don't understand the clock, Susie. Me too, yeah. It doesn't make too much sense. It's going 30, 31, 32. And maybe that's seconds, 27 and 2. So it's 2:27 and 41 seconds. All right, there we go. And right here at the entrance of 200 Water Street, which is no longer owned by Emery Roth and Sons, and the original sign was taken down. Rudolf de Herrick, I was learning more about the story of that clock. It's not that much to know about that story, but I did read some interesting comments. It was a comment on a random article from some random blog about this, where a guy claimed to be one of his students at Cooper Union. And he said that Rudolf de Herrick was a very interesting teacher, really tough professor at times, but would tell some interesting stories. And one of those stories was that along with the clock, he also built a sculpture to say 200 Water Street, which is the address of this building. They were made with silver balls. I wish I could find a photo of it, but I couldn't. But these silver balls, people found it very interesting, very artsy, very modern. Ooh, yeah. You know, 1980s, 1970s, 1980s. People were all about silver and chrome. And he admitted to his class that those silver balls were actually toilet flotation devices. Yeah. That was the modern art that he used in front of the address of one of the most prestigious architectural firms in all of New York City. Toilet balls to mark the address. Probably was paid a lot for toilet balls. That's it. And that's time for me to go. Everyone, I'll see you in Europe. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be going live. I'll put the time one more time over here. Thursdays through Saturdays at 9 a.m. New York City time, 6 a.m. LA, 2 p.m. UK, 3 p.m. Western Europe, and 4 p.m. the further down in Europe. I'll see you Thursdays through Saturdays starting next Thursday, 3 times a week. And some places, I'll be going to a lot of different places, so not all places will be having necessarily the best service. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of updates. There'll be mini live videos in different places that I won't be able to show in the full long live video. And a lot of cool stuff. I'm so excited. So, what time is it? It's Europe time. It's time to travel. See you soon in Europe next Thursday. Someone asked about the philosophical chat. Stay tuned. I will be planning that later. See you next Thursday at 3 p.m. European time, 9 a.m. New York City time, 2 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. Eastern European time. See you then. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.